On the eve of an August 1st deadline, President Trump delivered his ultimatum, a crippling 35% tariff designed to bring Canada to its knees. But in Ottawa, a stunning countermove was being unveiled. Prime Minister Mark Carney executed a bold new strategy, one so clever it threatens to bypass the tariffs entirely, leaving Washington's power play dead in the water. The move has reportedly left even US officials shocked. How did Canada's quiet leader turn the tables on the world's most powerful man? After years of brutal negotiations, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, was supposed to be the new bedrock of continental trade. Championed by President Trump himself as a historic victory, it was designed to create a new era of stability and predictability. It was the rule book, the foundation upon which trillions of dollars in commerce would be built. With clear rules of origin and a framework for resolving disputes, it was meant to end the very chaos that was about to unfold. But the foundation of trust began to crumble almost immediately. The Trump administration began to treat the USMCA not as a set of rules to be followed, but as a platform for leverage. The trade relationship became increasingly entangled with unrelated, highly charged political issues. The White House started linking trade talks to Canada's domestic and foreign policy, citing frustrations over everything from Canada's minuscule role in the US fentanyl crisis to, most bizarrely, its decision to formally recognize a Palestinian state. To Ottawa, these were separate diplomatic issues. To Washington, they were all bargaining chips. The clear lines of trade policy became blurred, replaced by a transactional, unpredictable, and deeply personal style of diplomacy. The rulebook was being thrown out, and it became clear that the biggest threat to the new trade deal was its own architect. On the very last day of July, on the eve of his own deadline, President Trump delivered his final ultimatum. He signed an executive order imposing a new, crippling 35% tariff on all Canadian goods that did not strictly comply with the rules of the USMCA. But he didn't stop there. To prevent any workarounds, he added an unprecedented 40% tariff on any products that were being transshipped through other countries to circumvent the new levy. It was an economic declaration of war, designed to be the knockout blow in a long and bitter trade dispute. The administration's public justification was a chaotic mix of grievances. The White House continued to hammer Canada over its recognition of a Palestinian state, framing it as an act of betrayal that made a good faith negotiation impossible. They publicly blamed Canada for contributing to the US fentanyl crisis, a claim that Canadian officials privately dismissed as absurd, pointing to data showing their country was the source of less than 1% of the illicit drug. But the real reason was leverage. After months of stalled talks, the administration had decided to abandon diplomacy in favor of raw economic power. The calculation was simple. By imposing a tariff so severe, it would create an immediate crisis for the Canadian economy, forcing Prime Minister Mark Carney to make massive concessions. Washington believed it had finally cornered its northern neighbor. It expected panic, chaos, and a desperate call from Ottawa begging for a deal at any price. But the panicked call never came. Instead of breaking, Canada refused to even bend. The response from Prime Minister Mark Carney's government was a strategic masterclass in de-escalation and defiance that reportedly left US officials stunned. There was no outrage, no threats of massive retaliation. Instead, Carney did something far more clever. He calmly accepted the reality of the situation. In public statements, he openly admitted that a completely zero-tariff relationship was likely impossible under the current US administration. This was a crucial first step. It managed public expectations at home and signaled to Washington that their shock tactics weren't working. Then came the bypass itself. Carney's bold move wasn't a single secret loophole. It was a strategy of radical acceptance. He pointed out that the vast majority, as much as 90%, of Canadian exports were already fully compliant with the USMCA and therefore completely immune to the new 35% tariff. The bypass was to simply ignore the hysteria and focus on the facts. Trump's cannon, it turned out, was aimed at a very small target. While expressing his disappointment with the US decision and calmly refuting the fentanyl claims, Carney's government focused its energy on helping the small percentage of affected industries adapt and further diversify their markets. It was a strategy that took all the political oxygen out of Trump's announcement. By refusing to panic, Carney exposed the 35% tariff for what it was: a headline-grabbing threat with a far more limited real-world impact than the White House had counted on. The pressure campaign had been neutralized. This has left the Trump administration in an awkward and weakened position. Their ultimate weapon has been fired, but it failed to trigger the expected surrender. The tactic backfired so effectively that the White House was forced to almost immediately signal a willingness to retreat. Secretary of State Howard Lutnick publicly suggested that if Canada were to drop its own retaliatory measures, the president might reconsider the 35% tariff. It was a clear sign that Washington was now looking for an off-ramp. Canada, having successfully called Trump's bluff, now holds the stronger hand. Prime Minister Carney has spoken of finding a landing zone for a potential deal, but he is doing so from a position of strength. The power dynamic has been completely upended. The US started the fight, but Canada, through a calm and calculated strategy, is now dictating the terms of the peace. While Prime Minister Carney's strategy was a national success, the cost of this trade war is still very real for some. For a family-owned steel company in Hamilton, the 35% US tariff is a direct and painful blow. Their specialized product, which uses alloys imported from Germany, doesn't meet the strict USMCA rules of origin. For years, the American market was their lifeblood, accounting for over 70% of their sales. Now, that market is virtually gone. The owner is faced with an impossible choice. Does he try to reformulate his product with North American alloys, a process that could take years and millions of dollars in research and development? Or does he abandon the American market altogether and try to find new buyers in a world already awash in steel? This is the human cost of the tariff war. It's the stress of meeting payroll when your biggest customer has vanished. It's the fear of having to lay off workers who have been with the company for decades. While the government in Ottawa is fighting the larger strategic battle, these are the businesses on the front lines taking the direct hits. Carney's government has vowed to protect the steel and auto industries, and it has successfully insulated the majority of them. But for those caught in the crossfire, the non-compliant 10%, the damage is severe. Their survival now depends not on the quality of their product, but on the whims of a volatile political conflict completely beyond their control. That specialized steel from Hamilton, Ontario, isn't just a random commodity. It's a critical component for a high-end construction firm in Denver that uses it for its unique structural properties. For this American company, the 35% tariff isn't a distant news story. It's a supply chain disaster. Their entire project was designed around the specifications of that Canadian steel. There is no easy American-made substitute. Suddenly, the cost of their most important material has skyrocketed, throwing their entire budget into chaos. They now have to go back to their client and explain that the project will be millions of dollars over budget or delayed by months while they try to re-engineer the building with a different material. This is the boomerang effect of the Trump tariffs. The policy intended to punish a Canadian steel mill is now inflicting direct and severe pain on an American construction company and its workers. It's a perfect illustration of how deeply integrated the two economies are. You cannot sever a connection on one side of the border without causing a painful jolt on the other. US officials may have been stunned by Canada's clever political strategy, but it's American business owners like this who are stunned by the real-world consequences of their own government's actions. The weapon fired north has once again caused an explosion in America's own backyard. A trade war that began with a roar of American power is ending with a quiet Canadian masterstroke. President Trump's ultimate tariff weapon has been fired, only to be deftly bypassed by a calm and strategic prime minister. The gambit has backfired, leaving the White House weakened and looking for an exit, while empowering Canada on the world stage. The very foundations of the North American partnership have been shaken. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.